What up, young slumlords and ladies? This is Jake Lapp, and welcome to the Young Slumlords podcast, where me and Caleb Henshaw talk our shiz and hopefully help spark the idea for finding your financial independence in this paycheck-to-paycheck world. What's up, guys? Welcome back. For this episode, we're planning on going through one thing that I think is really important. Your significant other and being on the same page is so incredibly important, and it's not a common thing to be thinking of. So, you're listening to podcasts, you're thinking of ways to become financially independent, but without communicating that to your significant other, it can really make or break a relationship. And I made a ton of mistakes, and this is with a super loving and supportive partner, but by me not communicating properly and letting this taken on stress get to me, especially with the first deals, there was definitely a lot of things that I did wrong. I wanted to be able to share how we got past them or better ways to do it. And, I wanted to get into it and start sharing that with everyone. So, I mentioned it in episode 1, but I have a very addictive personality. And after putting substances down and switching over to money being my vice, I got out of school and I set that goal. I was like, I'm going to make 6 figures by any means necessary this year. And I didn't realize that goal was going to directly impact my girlfriend at the time, and the amount of time and the amount of attention that I would be able to give to her through that process. I had very hyper focused, tunnel vision that I was going to achieve that goal. And at the beginning, to do that, I had to put my relationship second to what my number one goal was. And my way of justifying that was that this is for us. And I realized that through that process that if she was gone, it would be for nothing. So I'm very fortunate that she stuck by my side and, was that rock to encourage me to live life, and that everything isn't about money, and go hang out with friends and not work all the time. When things got heavy and, having that balance, having somewhat of a social life was so important. She supported my aspirations since we met, and I tried to do the same for her, but we both had very different views of money. She had significant struggles growing up, but money wasn't a part of that struggle. And even though I understand that money isn't everything, to me, not having money is everything. Getting into real estate, I put an offer on the triplex in Quakertown without telling her I was doing it. She never saw the place, and I knew that I was making a decision that was going to directly impact our lifestyle for the next few years. Having to move every year, staying in a small apartment where we would be capable of buying a pretty nice house, and living a normal life, making payments every month, and relying on, the kindness of our bosses for a raise every year, and then eventually working until we're 65. To most people, that is all that's known, and there aren't other options. People don't learn about creating passive income, so how can you blame them? This is life. You go to work every day forever, you work hard, and as long as you have a nice house, a nice car in the driveway, and you go on a nice vacation every year, you made it. That's the goal. And after learning about this strategy, I decided that I didn't want that to be my life. But the thing is that Kayla never made that decision. My significant other didn't make that decision with me. So now I break the news to her, this pivotal point in our lives, and I'm just thrilled. She, for some reason, wasn't sharing that same excitement, where, it was confusing. It was dude, this is the way. Why are you not beaming and through the roof that I just did this? And now it's too late. So she's a little hesitant, and I'm swamped. Buying a house, there's lots of paperwork. There's tons of nights, tons of hours that you're putting in just in the house buying process alone. But now to add on to that, you're looking for tenants, you're getting material together, you're getting a plan for like fixing everything up, moving, all during like working a full-time job. Like I still was working plenty of hours. Like I didn't take time off to be able to do this. So through all that stuff, like we barely had time to talk. And when she would ask me to do something, I was resentful because how can't she see that I'm swamped? Like I don't have time to eat, let alone spend quality time with her. Like my response to her was, this is for you. Like this is for us. This is for our kids. It's for our grandkids. Like stop being so selfish. And like it took a couple fights for me to realize that like what her side of things were. And like she never asked for it. Like what I was talking about earlier, like she was completely content with just living a normal life, working for someone else until 65. So what is there for me to do? Like she was cool with living like how everyone else is living, and I'm not. I want a better life for my family. I want to build generational wealth. I want to create something that like my grandkids won't have to worry about money. Like that's eventually the goal. And so we sat down and I tried my best to be able to articulate, to explain the process of how we can possibly retire and not need to work for money after being 30. One of us could always be home with the kids. We could travel. We could see the world. There's like the options were limitless. Eventually, we could even make a difference in the world. The thing is, like, I'm not a mind reader and neither is she. So why did I expect her to know what the plan was and to just be okay with everything without me explaining what I'm trying to do, like what the goal is? If she doesn't know what the goal is, like, how can she know? So that brings me to the first and like pretty much the only tip is like communication. The reason that I at first didn't show her the place was because I was worried she wouldn't see the big picture and maybe not like the apartment. And then she'd want to be involved and then we have to find the perfect place. When to me and in the scheme of things, it's just a rental. We just have to live here for 1 year. And in hindsight, if I had communicated that and the reason for living in the crappiest apartment and why the numbers at this particular property worked, she wouldn't know that unless I tell her that. So, and even before getting on the same page, you know, she did put a ton of work in. And more importantly, even though she wasn't thrilled, she trusted me enough to do what was best for us. She knew that I had that in mind. That was the biggest thing. And at that point, we had been together for almost 4 years, and to, you know, build that trust overnight is not normal. If it wasn't for that, we might have been in a very different story. She still did lots of cleaning, you know, moving, decorating. Her decorations alone had made the apartment a home, which ended up making us an extra $150 a month when we rented it out because there was so much more attraction to the place. And once we became on the same page, so that like switch probably didn't happen until we were at the first place, let's say 6 months, because she was seeing how it worked. She was seeing I wasn't entirely consumed with like just replacing toilets every night. Like it was just when things had to get done, they had to get done. But we were living somewhere essentially for free. Like you have to take in the down payment to consideration. Like that's a considerable amount of money to now, you know, quote unquote, live for free, but it's an investment. Now we're on the same page, but I was able to keep reminding myself that when things were becoming stressful, that she didn't ask for it. So I can't be upset with her when that happens. So like she was able to be a partner then in the next deal. So when we finally got on the same page, we were able to look at deals together. I would send her listings that I was thinking about. There are some that I got hard no's from, and probably in hindsight, they were good calls, things that would have turned into a lot of work. We went out and we saw listings, and like I communicated what the criteria was for these houses, like why this house is a good house and why this house isn't a bad house, even though the bad house has like beautiful hardwood floors and the listings look great. Like why would that be bad. So like just communicating like why some houses look better. It's helped us both out a lot, and she was much happier to be involved. You know, she helped so much more in the whole process that it actually took some of the weight of the process off of my shoulders, which like that's the point of a partner. Like it's not like I'm doing all this stuff constantly and like you're going in a different direction and thinking something else and just adding to that weight. Like the point of a partnership is like to share the weight and like make life the best for the other as possible when you can. And like going forward, you know, things aren't picture perfect. I still definitely work too much and I get consumed with it. But it's something that like we're still working on, and we both realize the importance of that mindset. So my advice to anyone that's thinking about taking this plunge that has a significant other is to, one, talk about your goals. See where your goals align and where they don't. If there's places that where they don't, you got to try to compromise. Like come with the facts and plan, do your research. Besides for this podcast, there's so many things out there. There's so many books, there's so many resources to be able to tell someone else, to get someone else on board. You need to know, because if you're just guessing and like, oh, you know, I heard this thing this one time, like that's not a selling point, especially for me. Like I'm scatterbrained. Like I have a new idea every day. Probably when the first time I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, like I spewed off like, oh my word, Kayla, like this is what we're going to do now. But she's used to hearing that all the time. So like actually going through with it was now new. And if they have no interest in that, like ask if they would support you doing it. And then on top of that, like you guys have to play each other's strengths and see each other's as assets instead of always being like analytical. Like this is your way, you dropped the ball. Like see what you're good with. Someone's good with numbers. Someone's good with like talking to people. Someone's good at decorating. Someone's good at building. Like playing each other's strengths. Like you'll always be grateful for them coming through with that. Where it's, I see it all the time. Like it can turn into like a competition, and that's not the point of a partnership.
You can be really powerful as a team together. Like you can play off each other's strengths and get a lot more done, provide a lot more value and output between the two of you. If you can find out, you know, you want to do all the home remodeling yourself, and then once it's all said and done, you need it staged, designed, decorated for the pictures and the showings and getting the tenants in, and you're more of an analytical person, you don't really know the difference between the color shades and what clashes and what doesn't. Having a significant other who understands that come in and work with you can really, you know, bring the two of you closer together as well, because you just have something you can work on together and see grow and get satisfaction from completing it. And it will definitely bring you closer together as long as you thoroughly communicate those different points that, you know, someone may struggle in a certain aspect and you can't push it onto them. If it's something that's really heavy for them to do, then maybe it's not something that should be pushed on for them to do personally.
For sure. And like making time for each other, like through this, like it's super easy to lose sight of the relationship when you're hyper focused on like achieving these goals. Just occasionally checking in is, you know, really important, whether it's like a date or literally just setting aside an hour to talk. Like it's really important. And like these have been the core, like all of this stuff is like to communication and active listening. Like no one reads minds. Like if you guys are talking openly, like actually openly, like not like one person's talking openly and the other one's like fine, it's like actually like responding and like pulling the response out even when it's hard, like even when you know you're dropping the ball, but having the significant other say it makes a difference. Like when I ask Gail, like she'll tell me like, I wish you would spend more time with me. Like I know that's the answer, but by her saying it, now if I still choose not to do it, she can be upset, but it's very easy to like gain resentment when you're not talking. So again, our relationship isn't perfect, but we openly communicate when things are bothering us. And like, I really think that's the best thing. And honestly, she still wants to marry me after going through the first deal, so I consider it a win. But I think I wanted to talk about going in hindsight, what I would have done differently if I would have asked for her input on the first house, because I was talking it out, and at that point, to me, I had a pretty good understanding of the multifamily situation. Like, I understood I was going to put roughly this amount of money down. I was roughly going to make this amount of money every month. Soon enough, I was going to make back my investment, and then the tenants would be paying the mortgage, and I'd be getting a little extra money, and that's how it worked. So, like, but I didn't have a ton of resources. At this point, I wasn't listening to a ton of podcasts. I was just reading books or listening to books. I hadn't found the Bigger Pockets until after the fact, when I had like a question about some weird landlord stuff, and I Googled it and it brought me to Bigger Pockets forum. So like, I didn't have the same knowledge that I was able to communicate with her at that point. So if I would have said to her like, hey, like, I'm pretty sure this is a good idea, but like wasn't 100%, I think there would have been much more hesitation on her side. I think that because of I didn't know all the things, if she was like, if I had another cook in the kitchen saying, oh, I don't like the color of this, oh, that seems like it's going to be hard, oh, like, I don't want to live there, those things would have potentially never got me started in investing. Like, it could have, so many were not perfect. They weren't the right one. The money wasn't there. Like, there could have been so many things that pushed that initial house buying thing back. And it's not her fault. It's because I didn't know the stuff. So like, my advice before was like, yeah, like, you know, I don't know if having that extra cook who hasn't done the same research, like, would be an asset. But now looking back, the amount of stress and the amount of, you know, fights we had because I was so stressed and overwhelmed and I didn't communicate those things, I learned from it, and the second one was much better through communicating. So I don't know what the answer is, if the answer is to start with just learning together, communicating more together openly in the beginning, getting on the same page, but it's hard to do that when you don't have any experience. So it's kind of a tough call. It's something that, you know, you kind of have to figure out for yourself, and there's no real right answer. I personally don't know what I would have done with, you know, knowing what I know now. So
I did have a different approach myself starting out, because back in August we had talked about, like, you know, I wanted to get a new place. I wanted to go out and rent, but I wasn't really sure if that was a good move inside. I just kept feeling like that was just a bad move, so it was just preventing me from going forward. I'd been thinking about it for a long time, and then looking at the strategy for doing the multifamily with splitting the units and living in one, renting out the others to pay for all your expenses, and then growing that over time was just kind of a no-brainer. It just made complete sense, and I just hopped on board immediately with it and started taking the next steps of getting the broker, getting pre-approved for a mortgage, getting the real estate agent, finding the listings, viewing the houses, and submitting offers. And it was just one thing after another. And it was only a couple of weeks from when I first started it to when we found this property on the MLS. And for everybody around me, it seemed like it was just super fast. But for me, like, as it was happening, it felt like a lifetime between everything that I was doing, just because there was so much going on. And I didn't take any time to really like step back and look at everybody around me, how what decisions I was making affecting them were. But I initially talked to Victoria, my girlfriend, about this initial plan that I had of going through and making this investment, and the long-term effects of what the sacrifices that would need to be made in the short term now for the gain in the long term. And I was pretty well read on it when I first had the plan to go forward with it. I had done my research. I had been recommended Bigger Pockets by Jake, and I just dove in head first, listening podcast after podcast after podcast, just getting as much information as I possibly could on it, just so I could understand it to the fullest. And the back end of it, of knowing how to analyze the deals, what the long-term goals were with all this was just something that just came really quick and easy to me personally. So when I was talking to her about it, it was just a matter of like running through the numbers, but it always came back to like the short-term sacrifices were just a pain point, and it makes sense, if we're living farther away than where we want to for shorter commutes and all that, it's a sacrifice being made now for that long-term gain. And I felt doing this now when we're young was the best time to do it, because there wouldn't be a better time. Is when we have more responsibilities in the future, when we have a family, it's just going to be that much more difficult, exponentially difficult. Trying to move into a 1-unit apartment with more than 2 people is pretty difficult. And all this was already decided in my head. I had already made all these decisions. I knew what the truth was, my personal truth. I knew what that was, but I just needed to thoroughly communicate that mindset, because that's not something you can just explain, one day to somebody and have them pick up on it, be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That's going to be my life now. Like, oh yeah, let me just hop on board with that. It takes a little bit more than that. And something that I had done myself was all this research and digging on all these principles myself that kept buying me into it even deeper and deeper. At first, I was similar to Jake. I was like, why aren't you all on board with this? But then I just kind of like thought back, of course, because I just sprung this on you the other day, and this is brand new to you. So this is not going to be the same thing, same perspective I'm coming from. So it was just a matter of showing all those cards, showing what all the benefits were in the long term, and then bringing that in to be on the same page, have the same perspective on these decisions being made now. And just what I was explaining was that real estate to me was just a tool to give us more flexibility in the future to make, take bigger risks and have more freedom. And for me personally, I would love to be able to quit my day job, found a tech startup, or grow a real estate knowledge to eventually get into like commercial deals, or even an opportunity I haven't thought of yet. And taking this jump was just that first step to all those different possibilities in the future. And explaining this to her just helped put all these current sacrifices into perspective, that just made it worthwhile, that we knew that this wasn't just a hard thing just because we want to do hard things. It was because it was really needed to open up all these doors for us. But personally, we had a lot of good times doing the process together. We closed on the house, went in the first day after closing and started working on the remodels and figuring out what was going on and figuring out which things that I would like to do and how she could help me throughout the process, just day to day. And it was a really good experience. Of course, we had to work through some differences brought up in the process that we may have never seen before, and we were able to determine disagreements that we had on set and possibly would have taken a long time and of figuring out. We were able to bring those up, talk about them, get them worked out, and just keep moving forward. And it was just something I found really valuable to come out of this process that I would have never seen coming before I got into it. And it provided a lot of value. And I highly suggest working with your significant other when diving into real estate, because it really does create a lot of value having a team working on it together, that they can support you in ways that you would have never known or never thought of yourself. That does create a lot of value. But I would just highly recommend knowing as much as you can beforehand to really explain like your drive to go into this, because like Jake said before, if you're kind of iffy or on the fence about it, you're going to come off that way, and it's not going to really be a convincing or a convincing point going forward if you don't even know what it is that you want to do. But it is something that can really bring you guys together closer as a relationship itself, just really strengthen it and bring out things that you never would have seen coming in before you hopped into it.
Bottom line, have these conversations now. Like, hey, I'm just listening to this one podcast. I just read Rich Dad Poor Dad. Like, I still haven't gotten Kayla to read it, but
Me neither.
I've been trying, and my mom picked up the book at a thrift store. So I have the paper copy now. So, because she didn't want to listen to it and she wanted to read it. So hopefully
We'll get him one day.
We'll get him one day. And, but yeah, so I really think this isn't a talked about thing because it's so personal. It's people who talk about real estate investing. It's all numbers, everything's numbers. It's the bottom line, but talking about the hardships, not only like financially and like with tenants and like with that stuff, but just like the strain on your relationship that the stress can cause and like ways to try to make it better, I think is super, super important.
And I think it's only a real negative if you don't focus on it, because if you recognize where the stress is coming from, you understand that maybe you just scooped up a little bit too much on your plate right now. You can just start working on it at a better pace that better suits you as a person. But if you don't understand how this affects the other person in your relationship, you can really cause a lot of damage. But if you do understand it and you guys work together on it, it is a complete opposite of a strain and just creates a bigger bond between you two.
For sure. So changing the subject and now, going into kind of a strategy, and that I've had people, reach out and say, Jake, like it just isn't in the works for me. Saving 30 to 50,000 in the short term isn't something that seems achievable. There is some other options, and there's one option in particular that we wanted to talk about on this podcast, on this episode. And like, if you really want to get in and you're thinking about renting an apartment and you have, the first month, the last month in security deposit saved up, this might be a strategy for you that you could get started in real estate investing. So, this option I actually found from previous tenants who were buying a house, and they said that they were putting like no money down and that their mortgage was not that expensive. And I was like, what kind of loan did you do? Like the FHA, like 3.5%? And they were like, no, we had to cover closing costs, but we had most of them covered too. And I was like, through what? And he was like, I don't know. The guy I talked to didn't know. And so I started doing a lot of research. And for me personally, I started this search for my mom because I'm at this point where, my mom's renting, and I would love to see her be able to not worry about paying rent, like to eliminate that cost for her and for her to start building equity. It seems like a no-brainer, with the knowledge and stuff that we're learning. I'm like, how can we get her into a situation like that where someone else is paying her rent and I can take care of the property management, dealing with tenants, and just put her in a spot similar to where she's living at now and alleviate that expense. So like, I heard about this loan that required very little money down. So I started looking into it, and there's like a Facebook post a Facebook group, no money down deals, like places that were eligible for no money down deals. And I called the broker or the listing agent that is associated with that page, and they started talking about the USDA loan, which I thought was for, the farmlands, like the out.
I thought it was for farmers as well, too.
I literally just thought it was for people with farms because it's the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Like, that's what USDA stands for. You'd assume it's for farmers, but Souderton, Telford, Harleysville, all are eligible for this loan with zero down. And when I say zero down of the purchase price, but you would still be responsible for the closing costs, like we talked about in the last episode. Could be upwards of $10,000, somewhere around there. And the requirements for this loan are, it needs to be in one of these areas, and you can find those areas if you go search on Google USDA loan eligibility map, and it will show you everywhere that's eligible and what the criteria is. So for, I think at Bucks County and Montgomery County, it's the same criteria. And I think it's like, as a single person, you can't make more than $95,000 a year. You have to have, I believe it's either 650 or 700 minimum credit score. You need, this is a pretty significant one. Your monthly payment can't exceed 30% of your income. And the income from possibly renting out doesn't count. And this also needs to be your first house purchased. The other kicker, which is a significant kicker, is multifamily deals don't work. It has to be a single family house. So it's like, Jake, I thought you were talking about, multifamily renting, like, and now you're talking about a single family house. And, this method is if you don't have a lot of money saved up and you really want to get involved in investing. Like there's going to be more sacrifice involved in this one than in renting out other units and living in one unit. So
there are ways to, like, there are strategies available to you that can make this work to rent out rooms. It's called house hacking, where you can have people that you know that
don't know.
Or don't know. That's true. People who just want to rent out either a specific room in your house and share it with you. That is definitely a possibility. You can get $500-$600 a month per room that you rent out to individuals. Granted, you're going to be sharing living areas with them, so it's going to be a little bit more of a personal experience with your tenants versus having a multifamily where the only time is where you share common areas like laundry rooms and stuff like that. But if you can make that work for your situation and you have not a lot of money and you don't plan on saving up a lot of money, or it's not possible for you, it is 100% an option to get into the game, get a single family house, rent out rooms to cover part of your mortgage. And it may even really cut back on how much money you're spending in the long run if you're already paying for rent now and you've got a bit of money saved up and you can make that jump out of it. You can actually change your whole financial situation here, where you're building equity month to month, which could be leveraged for a loan in the future. And then on top of it, reducing your monthly expenses, allowing you to save up money faster to eventually get into a more investment focused deal, such as a duplex, triplex, or quadplex.
Before I start getting more into that strategy, there's another loan that you can use on top of this no money down loan. So, I had mentioned, you could be looking at $8,000 to $10,000 in just closing costs. And this other loan, it's called the PHFA loan. And what that loan is essentially a secondary mortgage on the house. So in our area, you can get up to $6,000 of your closing costs and make interest-free payments on that for 10 years. So I think that ends up being like $50 a month. But so it's very little, and that is now taking your $10,000 to $8,000 to $4,000 to $2,000. Like, and that's where I was talking about, like, if you have the money saved to put first month, last month, and security deposit down on an apartment, and you can get in to a house where now you're renting out rooms, using Airbnb, doing any of these things that, like, you're not paying rent or paying very little for rent. It's kind of crazy that this is an option. Like, I had no idea about it. But now I wanted to take, kind of some breakdown numbers, between a $250,000 duplex that we went over last week, and the numbers that we kind of found on that, and compare it to a $250,000 single family house that you're putting little to no money down and renting rooms out. So, the first things first is you're going to want the most square feet, the most bedrooms, the most bathrooms. That's going to create the best return for this strategy. So, let's say we have a 4-bed, 2-bath, single family house. And then we have also for sale a 4-bedroom, 2-bath duplex. So it's, each unit has 2 beds and 1 bath. And let's run those numbers. So, like, I think we said with the FHA down, you're going to be close to $30,000 out of pocket. And then you're also going to be paying $1,300 a month because you're living in one unit. The other unit, you're getting $1,200 a month for. So you're paying, essentially, in that scenario, $100 a month to live. For the single family house, that's 4 beds and 2 baths, you're living there. Let's say you're renting each room out for $500, which is, in our area, way below market for a place to live. So you'd be surprised how many people would be willing to live somewhere like this for $500 a month. And, you multiply that by 3. So you're living somewhere and you're getting $1,500 a month. And, your mortgage is going to be more expensive with 0 down, another loan on the closing costs. Like, those will add up, and so your mortgage is going to be more expensive. So for this sake, let's say $1,500 a month. Now you're making all your money back. You're making $1,500 a month. You're spending $1,500 a month. The duplex, you're making $1,200 a month, you're spending $1,300 a month, it's worth it. Like, and instead of paying $30,000 down, you put $2,000 down. So the numbers actually kind of make more sense to do the house hacking strategy. Now, that won't go without headaches. Like, this is not going to be a super easy task. And we have a guest that we're going to eventually bring on who did a lot of this, and he can definitely speak on some tips. But the ones that I really took from it was hiring a cleaning person. You know, one of those things where you're sharing a house with 3 other people, you've got all these common spaces. Like, the whole house is a common space, and like, who's pulling their weight? Someone keeps leaving their dishes in the sink. Someone is using all the toilet paper. Like, that's like normal things that drive roommates crazy. And to be able to hire a cleaning person to come in once a week, once every 2 weeks, and tidy up, make everything nice, everyone pays their rent and they're paying for this cleaning service as well. It can eliminate a lot of headaches. So it's a step. It's something, that's going to be an extra expense. And so now, let's say you have to pay $300 a month instead of $1,000 a month at your last apartment, and you're building equity. And once you're there for a year, you move out, you rent your room, you're cash flowing some, and you started. And now you always have the possibility of refinancing or selling or pulling your equity back out at some point.
Even moving out as well and renting out the entire house to roommates and just keeping that maid on rotation to clean the place, stock the toiletries, and just make sure there's no fights in between the tenants, because there are people who both of us have heard have gotten this strategy to work where they're making killer cash flow on these houses, something that you would never expect to make on a duplex or a triplex. There's of course more overhead because of all the shared common area, but if this is something that is the only way for you to get in, it can definitely be a viable strategy.
Another strategy too, if you do this for a year and you hate it, let's say worst case scenario, everyone's an asshole, you're constantly doing landlord stuff. A very real option in this particular situation is like, okay, I could be getting $2,000 a month from 4 tenants, or I can rent the whole 4-bedroom, 2-bath house for $2,000 a month. It's the same amount of money, and that's you'd have to break down the numbers, because you could definitely get more than $500 a month. You could maybe get more than $2,000 a month for the whole house. So like, weighing those pros and cons, but seeing that as another exit strategy is like, oh, I can just rent this whole house. They're in charge of their own utilities. They're in charge of everything besides for making the mortgage payment is a real option as well. I wanted to put this in the podcast, and like, even though we don't have experience doing it, it could definitely be an obtainable step, like something that is real, something that you could do now if you don't have a lot of money laying around.
And an actionable step for that is just to reach out to a mortgage broker, get pre-approved, let them know that you're interested in this loan type, find out the exact specifics of what your criteria are. Due to it being only 30% of your income is the max you can pay per month for it, you want to find out what that number is and get that list of criteria that you need for that specific house that would fit all that and still be a good deal, and then give that to a real estate agent. Let them know this is exactly what I'm looking for, and that'll really help him or her find exactly what house would work best for you, and then they can tailor that in a search on the MLS and then give you an automated email of properties as they come up that meet that criteria that can really help you find that property and get you in the game. So now we're actually going to transition into the MLS analysis, and we're going to take a little bit different approach this time. We're going to look at a property that Jake actually purchased himself here, and we're going to look at it as we looked at it back in the day when we were first picked it up off the MLS, and we're trying to determine if this was going to be a good deal. So what was the list price for your duplex?
So it was $244,000, I believe, is what it was originally listed at.
And what were the comparable rent prices in the area for the units in the duplex?
So I was pretty sure for the 2-bedroom, 1-bath, if everything was nice, I could get anywhere from 1,200 to 1,400, average 1,300 for the 2-bedroom. And then for the 1-bedroom, there was a few that were dumps that were renting for $800. There were some nice ones for over $1,000. So I was thinking like close to 900. So I was thinking, total income after we move out would be around 2,100 a month. With then the 1% rule, that would be 210,000. That would fit that criteria, but we'll go into more of the specifics.
So, going into those specifics on the house, what were the utilities like, and what kind of prices were you expecting to pay for those utilities?
Yeah, so the house was already split electrically. It had 2 hot water heaters. It had gas was split. The utilities were the 1-bedroom had electric baseboard heat, and the 2-bed unit had a gas furnace that like the ducts just went to the second floor and second and third floor. So it went to that unit, and tenants paid for their own electric, their own gas, which was the heating and AC, which is the big one. And then water and sewer and trash were the responsibility of the landlord. So for trash, I called the borough. They made it a requirement for a duplex that you had to have 2 trash cans, where my triplex in Quakertown, I had 1 trash can for 3 units that honestly worked fine. So I was like, crap, I'm paying $400 a year at Quakertown. That's going to be $800 at Souderton. But I called the borough, and they said it was actually closer to $200 per trash can. So it ended up being around the same cost for trash, which was about $33 a month for trash. And then water, I honestly didn't know what that would be. I Googled it. I was looking at kind of what that expense would be, and I came up with about $100 a month for water and sewer. That the trash held up, and the water and sewer they bill quarterly. So the water bill is like $130. So that, what's that divided by 3 is like $40 a month for both. And then sewer, I think, was around $80. So again, divided by 3 is like 20. So that ended up being like 60 plus the 33, pretty much $100 a month in just regular expenses. Oh, plus there's actually 3 panels in the basement for electric, and there's a landlord panel which covers the basement that's used as a shared space, and the porch light and the hallway light, which has been about $25 a month. So what's that? About $125 a month is my expenses.
And those were the actual numbers after doing all the, like, gathering the data from living there and having tenants in, which when you're doing, like, running these numbers, you want to definitely pad them high.
Yeah.
So that way, if you get the actuals in and they're a lot higher than your projected numbers were, you're not hurting on the monthlies. But yeah, that seems like it was pretty affordable, especially since they were all separated out. Once you have that rented, those costs are alleviated for you personally, but definitely seems with the income. What was your after all that was said and done, what was your actual mortgage cost on that?
Well, so I want to get into then the actual purchase price. I said that it was listed for $240. I set up a showing, and the first floor unit was vacant, so that was perfect. There was actually 2 properties, both listed around the same. I think they were on the same street, and I set up. They were both duplexes, both had the same layout, and the one was listed for, I want to say, $215, and the other was for $240. The one that was $215 had both units currently rented, and the one unit that was the 1-bedroom that I would have wanted to live in had a tenant of 40 years. And when I went through the walkthrough, she was like a 90-year-old woman who had lived there for forever and paid like very little money in rent. And I personally could not kick her out. So that totally took that deal away from me. I didn't want to be involved in that. And so I went with the other one. But so when I walked through, the one unit's vacant, which was perfect for us. The other unit we walked through, it was decorated really nicely. You could tell the tenants cared. And when I was walking through the place, I saw a picture on the mantle, and I knew the people. Like, they were friends from high school and stuff. And, so I left and I called my friends, and they were like, oh, yeah, our landlord offered to sell it to us a year ago for 180. And so I'm like, oh, snap. He wanted to sell it a year ago for 180. Now he wants 240. There must be some wiggle room there. So I took that. I sent the deal over to my mortgage guy. I asked him what it would take for my monthly payments to be under $1,200, because I knew I could at least get $1,200 from the one unit. And that was, at the time, my criteria. I want to be able to live there for free and maybe even cash flow some. And then eventually, when we move out, have that unit provide the cash flow. So I told my mortgage guy, with this specific property, for my estimated taxes, insurance, mortgage, which includes the principal and interest, I want that to be below $1,200. I was putting 15% down, claiming residency, and I said, what would be the lowest number I could pay, and all those payments combined be under $1,200. He came back and he told me $210,000. So $210 was my max that I wanted to spend. The other information I had from the tenants was that 180 was the lowest he would go. So I put in my first offer at 180. They countered back, I want to say, at 215 or 220. I countered back at 190. They then came with their lowest and final offer, which was $204,400. So it was under my threshold of 210, and I said, okay, contingent on inspections. So now I had an inspector come in and go through the property. The roof was new, pretty recently built. He had just recently built a deck on the back, which it kind of explains why he wasn't letting it go for 180 like he would have a year ago. And, there was a lot of work that needed to be done. Our bathroom was a couple square feet. Like, actually, it was pretty hard to even sit on the toilet because it was so small. There was knob and tube wiring. The deck was sagging. There was definitely some things that needed to be done. After getting my inspection report back and breaking down kind of what it would cost me to do those things and what it would cost a contractor to do those things, I figured for a contractor to come in and do everything, it would probably be close to $15,000 or $20,000. For me to do it, I thought I could do it for under $5,000. My goal was $3,000. So with that information, I went to the seller on my reply to inspection, and I asked for a seller's assist of I asked for a seller's assist of $12,000. He counteroffered at $6,000. I counteroffered at $10,000. He countered at $9,000. We met at $9,000. So all in, the purchase price of the house ended up being $194,000 or $195,000, and my mortgage payment with interest, insurance, all that good stuff was $1,115 a month.
So when you're getting the seller assist from the contract, does that actually reduce like the loan amount itself, or is that just a piece of the closing costs or down payment that gets removed, paid for by the seller?
Yeah, sorry. So the actual loan amount stays the same, but the seller's assist money comes from just the closing costs. So I saved $9,000 on my cash to close. So in my head, it brings the purchase price from $205 to $195, but really the purchase price is still $205, but I saved $10,000 on the closing. And it's just like a weird verbiage, but it's essentially the same thing.
Yeah, for sure. And so your monthly expenses for the mortgage was under $1,200, which is your goal there. So you were able to rent out that upstairs and then live downstairs. Running these numbers after it's fully rented out, what was the comps that you had run? And then with that, what was your profits looking like for the property?
Yeah, so it was a little tricky, especially because I knew the tenants. Like I said, I had went to two pretty much identical properties that were both for sale on the same street on the same day. And I remembered seeing $1,300 it was $1,200. No, it was $1,100. Sorry, I'm looking at it now. The 2-bedroom was getting $1,100. the one bedroom was getting like nothing, but I was like, we're living here. So I was just focused on the 2 bedroom. They were getting 1,100. So I was like, all right. Went to my friends and I was like, look, guys, it was an awkward conversation, but I was like, I know you guys are paying 1,100 now. Could you pay 1,200? To get that back, I'd love to like put new flooring in the bathroom, paint, like try to like make it more of an attractive place for you to live for that extra $100 a month. And the response I got was, Jake, do you know what we're paying now? And I was like, I thought it was 1,100, and they were paying 800 a month. So I just screwed over, friends of mine and was like, yeah, dude, I'm going to need $400 more a month. And then I was like, look, the lowest I could go and like not be losing money would be $1,150 a month. So that would cover just their cost of living at the house. It would cover the mortgage and the utilities and stuff just for them. And, I explained that to them and they were like, yeah, that's no problem. The only thing is, can we stay on a month-to-month lease because we're hoping to buy a house soon? I was like, that's no problem. So they stayed for a couple months and then bought a house. And then I just rented out the unit again. I, fixed things up and got a new tenant in the end of the month, and they're currently paying $1,300 a month. So that was my goal right now, with the mortgage, with the utility costs. So, $1,115 plus the $125 is $1,240, and I'm bringing in $1,300 a month. We're cash flowing $60 a month, living there for free, but that also freed up the apartment we were living in, which then we were able to rent out, brought it $1,250. So now the triplex that we were in is now functioning to its full potential. We're living somewhere for free, and the end of the year we'll be able to maximize the profits. And we put a lot of work into the downstairs apartment, and we're hoping for $1,000 or maybe even $1,100 for that. So
I think the most important thing to pull from that deal especially is that they had it listed as technically a bad deal, that it was $244,000 list price, and when you run the numbers on that, it does not come back as a good deal no matter how you look at it, just specifically with the 1%. And then even when you break down the numbers, it just doesn't add up. So something to keep in mind when you're looking at these properties, that you see list prices that are really high, that at the end of the day, you're just going to have to put in an offer and see if they bite, see if they respond back with a counter, and then just have a little bit of back and forth to see if you can get it under your threshold to make it a good deal. Because at the end of the day, it's just a number. Everything comes down to a number with these. And if you can quickly analyze all the prices are included in the deal, utilities and mortgage, you can really find out accurately the highest amount you can pay, and then trying to get lower than that to make it even better. But it's just something to keep in mind when you're checking these out, because you will see a lot of properties like this that are listed way more than will make them a good deal.
For sure. And like a house is only worth what it sells for. Like you can look at comps, you can look at things, and the true value of a house is the number that it sells for, and that's it. You can think that you have all this equity because your neighbor's house sold for this much, but it really comes down to how much money you get for it. So, with this one, the house was sitting for almost 3 months. So again, in a hot market, investors aren't seeing that as a good return, especially, some investors don't want to see a vacancy. I see it as a huge opportunity to come in, increase the value, and get market rents for it. But, it's just playing your advantages. So, and like I said, there was a lot of legwork in this one. The rehab at this place was significantly more than my last deal, but it was all stuff that we were able to do. We bought this, and still the lease didn't start for our old apartment for another month. So I had a month of living at the one and being able to work on the other, getting that ready to move in, then start moving stuff in, and then, kind of slowly doing things that way. We jacked up the whole front porch, put 6x6s underneath, redid the foundation. My dad helped out a lot with that, and I learned some tips and tricks for doing that, which seemed like a really expensive fix. Like when you talk about a building sagging or a deck sagging, like a lot of people are like, you got to call the engineers or the professionals. And, we were in there for a day and, probably $600 worth of material and got it done. So that was the first step. The flashing on the roof, even though they replaced the roof, they didn't replace the flashing, and that is where the leaks happen. So like there was still an active leak when I got it. You saw it in the third floor bedroom. I was able to seal that up, and lots of other things. It had knob and tube wiring. I replaced all the electrical because I had the access. It was from the basement to the first floor, so I was able to dedicate lines, put in new outlets and do everything nice. Painting. My dad put a crown molding in the living room, which it makes it look really sharp. New flooring in the kitchen, new flooring in the bathroom. I took out a wall of the bathroom, moved a vent to just give us, I think we got like 3 more square feet in the bathroom, but it made it doable to go to the bathroom, to have Caleb come in and actually be able to use the bathroom. And, we did that. There was a lot more involved in this one. We took a bunch of trees down. There was old concrete foundation in the back parking spots. Broke that up and tried to level that out. Put a shed up in the back that I ended up getting from a friend. I moved the plumbing and the wiring in the basement to move the laundry setup into its own spot in the basement. So there was a significant amount of work, and all in with, besides for paying myself, the material cost for the whole rehab was under the $3,000 that I was hoping for. So again, super doable. Definitely had help, but it was a job. But I think it's worth a lot more now. Definitely was a good property. Definitely was a good investment, and we really like living there now.
And I think like the most important thing for getting in is like all that value add, all that learning from it would have been completely impossible if you hadn't picked up the deal in the first place. And that definitely was something that we both learned. The negotiation part was something from the book Never Split the Difference, which is something that we were interested in bringing up to you guys, letting you know about that book. It's just mind-blowing, the information in there about how to talk to people, how to get your point across, and how to negotiate specifically. And it's an extremely valuable book to learn to read from. That was something we wanted to do for the homework for you guys. If you're interested in reading books, get it on Audible. If you're into audiobooks,
get it on YouTube. It's free. It just doesn't sound good, but you'll get the point.
Yeah, if you don't mind robot voices or whatever that is on YouTube. But no, the information in there is invaluable, and will make that process of that back and forth just plain and simple. The tactics and the strategies to get the number that you want to get just clear as day. So definitely check that out if you haven't heard of it or listened to it already, and listen to it again if you have. Give it a couple if you can.
Yeah, seriously. Caleb showed me this book a while ago, and it made a significant impact on my life, like day-to-day haggling, reaching for no. There's so much good stuff in this book. It's an ex-FBI negotiator, CIA, whatever.
Yep, FBI, yeah.
Yeah, FBI negotiator, and like it's such a good book. Like definitely, I hope at some point we'll have an episode of just diving into that specific book and like the strategies of haggling and like getting your point across and dealing with people. It's a very, very valuable book.
Yeah, because for these deals, you can be erasing tens of thousands of dollars that you would be paying just on a few conversations in the initial process. Specifically, we just went over that deal where it was terrible at first, and setting your anchor at a super low number and then going back and forth and then getting them right where you wanted them in the first place. It was just something that can make any bad deal a good deal if you know how to use those strategies. So definitely check it out.
And with that, guys, that wraps up episode number 3. Thank you, everyone, for listening, for writing reviews, for leaving comments and stuff like that. We love talking to all you guys. Like, it's still at this point, it's just our friends listening to it, but like the conversations that we're sparking, it was the goal of this. Like the entire goal was to start for our friends an easier segue and to start talking about money. And like we see it happening. It's awesome. And so thank you guys. See you next week and stay slummy.